Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum, and we're going to be providing a general market outlook. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. We do have several different tiers available, including a free one. Make sure you check it out. Links in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. So Ethereum has been sort of in this range for almost a year now. So to the dismay of both the bulls and the bears, Ethereum has not really provided a definitive move in either direction. You could argue that really since November of 2021, Ethereum has been in the process of putting in lower highs, but the bulls could argue since June of 2022, it's actually been putting in higher lows. And of course, we've always talked about Ethereum eventually returning home, which of course is the lower logarithmic regression band fit to, again, quote unquote, non-bubbled data. So it's this sort of data in here that it was fit to. And so the argument is as well, will Ethereum eventually find that deep value level during this market cycle? What's interesting, if you zoom in, you'll actually notice that if we actually connect these wicks as closely as we can, Ethereum has been sort of flirting with that lower regression value, that lower regression trend line, but unwilling to actually make the final plunge into it. Now, of course, you might argue, I've seen a lot of people argue the reason is because of the merge, it's because of changing tokenomics. And while that might have some effect, if the bear market, if regulation comes for the cryptoverse and the altcoin market, it still might not keep it out of that lower regression trend line. One of the things we've also said before is, there's two ways we get there. Either we go to it or it comes to us. And I mean, back over here, that fair value was close to around 584. Now it's a little bit higher at maybe like 750 or so, but still below the prior low for Ethereum back in June. So if you zoom in here on these lower highs and higher lows, if Ethereum were to revisit the bottom part of this range and come back down, it would go back down to that maybe $1,200 to $1,300 range. And eventually, if Ethereum is unable to break out right here and it just simply comes back down into the lower part of this range, eventually it's going to have to break out one way or another, because this is sort of coming to an endpoint by May. So I would expect us to either break to the upside or the downside by May. Of course, you guys know my opinion. I would prefer to see it go home to the regression trend line, because that's ultimately where I think the deep value can be found, in the same way it was found over here in 2018, the same way it was found in 2020. So I think that's worthwhile to continue watching. If you look at the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, it's continued to sort of ride this increasing upward sloping trend line. And we're actually we just bounced off it a little bit recently. If you zoom in though, you'll notice that we are unable to really get above the bull market support band in a sustained way. So I would be somewhat, again, I remain bearish on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation. Arguably, you might say we're somewhere around this level over here, where eventually it could ultimately break down. Now, of course, it has been taking a lot longer than I thought it would. That's assuming it does, because there's no guarantee that it does. But this is also coming to sort of a point sometime by March. So not only is the Ethereum USD valuation sort of coming to a decision point by that March and April timeframe, you could argue the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is sort of coming to a very similar phase. And then another way I thought that was worthwhile to take a look at the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is to not just measure the price relative to Bitcoin, because the supply is of course changing. Why don't we measure the market cap of Ethereum divided by the market cap of Bitcoin? And I look at it in this top range over here and can't help but wonder if it's not just looking something like this, where it has this sort of distribution phase in this upper region, only to ultimately break to the downside. Now, if you look at the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, I'm not bearish to the point that I think it's going to come back down to 0.017, as I've said before. I think you're likely, assuming it does break down, I think you're likely looking at something like this, where Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation could be slowly moving higher with time on some type of a logarithmic regression trend line. So if it does ultimately break down here, once you get down to this sort of level right here, somewhere below 0.04, could be somewhat akin to this range here, and this range here. It's hard for me to accept that this range up here is the same value as you get here in 2020, or the value you got in 2016, or the value you got in 2015. However, if the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation broke back down to say 0.03 to 0.04, I think you are starting to get more into the conversation of, all right, well, this is getting into some levels of relatively deep value compared to, where it's been over the last couple of years. So I think that's going to be something that we'll need to continue to watch, frankly, throughout this year to see, does the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation break down? And if it does, I think that would actually provide somewhat, relatively deep value for long-term investors. Doesn't mean that it has to. I want to be clear about that. I know a lot of you guys. I see the comments are quite bullish on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation over here, because I guess you could always look at it in a different way and say that this is just slowly increasing. But just in my own experience, I've come to terms with, after you get out after, at least a year after the bear market has started, for Bitcoin at least, that next year can still be somewhat brutal to the rest of the market. I mean, again, take a look at the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation. So I mean, even if you're in the camp that Bitcoin is bottomed, that doesn't necessarily mean that ETH Bitcoin has. This entire move down here by ETH Bitcoin occurred during a time when Bitcoin was going up. And then also, I mean, over here it was when Bitcoin was going down back in, August and September of 2019. So just keep that in mind, that I do think there's a strong likelihood, at the very least, we'll be revisiting this level from 2022 sometime this year. And maybe one way that this could play out would be sort of coming back down to this level at some point, bouncing up, and then maybe going into the deep value zone, and then trying to sort of recover out of that. Again, going over to the Ethereum USD valuation, I suppose if you wanted to try to look at the more optimistic side, there is always a chance that Ethereum holds support on the bull market support band. That ranges from 1370 to 1467. Though there are many times on the first test that it does not hold support. I do think last cycle Ethereum did hold it on its first attempt, unlike Bitcoin. But one of the reasons Bitcoin didn't was because Bitcoin was a lot more bullish at the time, and Ethereum could barely keep up with it. That was one of the reasons why Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation was actually going down during the time that Bitcoin USD was going up. But eventually, even though it held right here, it was unable to hold right here, and eventually ended up coming all the way back down and putting in at least a double bottom. So just something to consider with regards to Ether USD, Ether Bitcoin. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.